All right, welcome everybody. I'm with a true friend this time, and his name is Kevin Atticks, and he is the Maryland Secretary of Agriculture. Welcome.
Thank you very much. A true friend.
A true friend.
I like it.
Well, we've been friends for a little while.
Yes.
Yeah. Since before you were in this job.
Yes.
Secretary of Agriculture. You got a big job, a hard job. First, just tell us what the scope is of the work of the Maryland Department of Agriculture.
So that is a great.
It's a long question.
It's a great question because I think agriculture means something to some people and not much to others. And so when you think about what agriculture is, yes, it's farmers. So we regulate the farming industry. On the other hand, we promote the farming industry. And then there's all the other.
I'll just say farmers far prefer being promoted than regulated.
Well, of course they do. Yeah,
Okay.
But a lot of times we have to regulate them to promote them, right, to make sure they're promotable.
All right.
But then there's all the other things that the agency does that way back in the beginning times were related to agriculture and they got put in our department. For example, inspecting seeds and inspecting turf grass and weights and measures. So every scale that measures your chicken salad in the grocery store, we regulate. The flow of gasoline at gas pumps, we regulate because farmers had to distribute their products.
Interesting.
And we were some of the first ones that had vehicles, i.e. horsepower.
So now you do all vehicles. That's funny.
We do, and we're about to start regulating EV chargers.
Oh, really?
Which comes out of regulating fuel pumps.
That is nuts.
Yeah.
Whatever. So when I think of agriculture, I think of farms.
Yep.
And I know you do too.
Yep.
And I will just say that for listeners who don't know, I think most of them do, that I was making my living on the farm, mostly training horses, but we also grew hay and some things. And before I was doing that, farm in the family was doing beef cattle. Before that, it was tobacco, before the buyout and all of that down in southern Anne Arundel County. And so I have an affinity for the difficulty of being a farmer, for the work, and a love-hate relationship with the Department of Agriculture and government in general.
No doubt. The struggle is real.
The struggle is real. Yeah. So why don't you first tell us how you came to this job? How obviously you were appointed by the governor,
yes.
but why do you think you were chosen?
Well, I would say I might be seen by many as a unique choice because typically it is a farmer and one who farms commodity crops. Has been the traditional agriculture secretary, a grain farmer. And in this case, I came from the ag policy side, so trying to make things better from a business environment standpoint for specifically value-added agriculture. So not necessarily just the grain growers, but the whiskey producers who make whiskey from Maryland grain. And very often the grain grower who decides to value add their product into whiskey to make more money off their farm. So that was my kind of area of expertise. And
I will just say that's how I met you.
Yes.
Because I was the president of the Maryland Horse Council. You were the manager of a number of groups of agricultural groups, but your organization was called Grow and Fortify.
Yep.
And the focus was value-added agricultural activities, things you can do on the farm to turn the farm product into something that has more value to be able to actually make farming profitable.
Which is what farming is about, is more value.
Yeah. And you were also the guy who was always sort of the expert on local policy, often at the county level, as well as state policy, but for things like agritourism and activities that nobody knew how to regulate and zone for and things like that. And so we all turned to you and Grow and Fortify for advice and sometimes advocacy.
Yes, and we had Horse Day in Annapolis to try to spread the word around the industry.
We hired you to coordinate that.
Yeah, I mean the issue with agriculture in the state of Maryland is if all you're doing is growing it, it's pretty clear what and where you can do. Agricultural areas, agricultural zones, rural areas, you're going to be able to grow stuff. But anything else, it gets complicated. If I want to grow food in the city, it may not be allowed. If I want to have a commercial chicken operation to grow eggs in the city or in a suburb, probably not allowed. And then it gets really complicated if you want to take milk from a cow, turn it into ice cream, and sell that ice cream at an ice cream parlor on your farm. I mean, that is really complicated for the health department, for the environment department,
It
for
didn't used to be
local
back in the
county
day.
zoning. Well, no, because I think back in the day, farmers had a lot more respect, a lot more leeway. Mm-hmm. And nowadays there are new levels of concern around environment and what farming may or may not be doing to the environment, mm-hmm. how cars parking on grass at your creamery may or may not cause runoff or hurt runoff or be mm-hmm. an impervious surface, stormwater runoff. So there's all of these new regulations that probably were not built with farming in mind, but mm-hmm. when you apply it to farming, man, it's complicated.
Yeah. And actually, I will say that's what got me interested in local politics.
Yeah.
I was a community organizer back in the day, but then as a farmer, we, first as the Horse Council and then as a member of the Farm Bureau Board, we decided that it was insane that you had to get the same kind of a building permit to build a barn, a stick barn, with the Amish crew coming in with the kid or whatever, as you did for a 7-Eleven or another kind of a commercial entity. And so we ended up getting legislation with your help through the county council to allow the Soil Conservation District to just certify that it was part of the farm plan, and it simplified things a lot and good for farm businesses. So, which
is huge, but in the scheme of things, mm-hmm. that was a little minor change that had to be made. But the impact that has on a farm is potentially farm saving,
right?
Family saving, mm-hmm. right? Because I was on a grain farm yesterday, and there were 4 generations standing in front of me, and Grandpa did it his way, and his son, the dad, did it pretty much the same way. And then as they walked away, I turned to the kids and I said, "So what are you going to do? What are you thinking?" And they just kind of looked at me and said, "Well, I guess we're going to try and do this, what we've always done." And I started throwing out ideas like, what about all these other things? You're right on the main tourism, road, and mm-hmm. there are agritourism opportunities popping up around you. Come in and meet with me and let's talk about some alternatives, because I just heard your grandfather complaining about how things are so tough, and I just heard your dad complaining about how it's so tough. But if you can find a way to find a new market, to play the game a bit, mm-hmm. rather than just – and I know there are investments. They've got millions of dollars of equipment, and they've built, purpose-built facilities to store grain, et cetera, but there are some minor tweaks you can do, some potentially new crops that deer don't like, that you could raise your revenue.
There's deer everywhere.
There's deer everywhere, but they don't like certain things for which there's a market. Mm-hmm. Why aren't we growing more of those things?
Yeah.
In addition to managing the deer.
Yeah. It is interesting because you said that a lot of these regulations didn't take place before, and I've always thought of it as, especially farming in a kind of suburban county like ours where there's a lot of regulation because there are a lot of people, and it's built for the urban and suburban areas in particular. You can get by with a little less government when there aren't as many people in rural areas. But on the other hand, so you help them get through that, navigate the regulation. But there are advantages to being in an area with a lot of people when you're running a farm.
It's called the market.
Yeah. So in Anne Arundel County, as you know, I think in most counties, but particularly here, we've always had in our general development plan that we want to protect our open space, our farms, our agricultural areas. And part of our plan even says that farming has to be commercially viable so that people will keep their farms. And
that's wildly innovative, by the way, because in most cases, counties are still grappling with the concept that a farmer is a commercial enterprise. Mm-hmm. And because to them, a hairdresser is a commercial enterprise, an auto shop is a commercial enterprise, a CPA is a commercial enterprise.
And so is a farm, right?
Well, since when have farms not been transactionally commercial enterprises, right? They're not. This isn't a hobby, and they're not just looking at silos of grain. They're marketing it. They're selling it.
Yeah.
Some of these farmers many of these farmers, just about every farmer that I've talked to, is the smartest business person ever because they're cutting deals with buyers in other countries, and they know down to the penny what things cost.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I know down to the penny what some of my expenses cost, but to be able to give them the opportunity to think a little bit different, to grow the food that we eat. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. I remember when COVID came along and the supply chains were broken, and for a while it was hard to get meat and things.
There was a run on eggs, toilet paper, also an agricultural product, forestry.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? Like all of these things choked up because either they weren't making it or they weren't able to get the inputs to make it, or the distributor, the trucks, everybody had COVID.
Yeah.
The plant shut down,
Yeah.
Meat was your example, and that got a lot of people thinking about the food system.
Good. Well, it got me thinking too, and I wasn't able to do everything that I thought up, but I remember going with my kids through a list of the things that maybe the government could do to help people turn, let's say in Davidsonville, where we have a lot of huge lawns because they zone for 20 acres and they're not farms, but for turning some of this land into food production. And what would it take? Fences for to keep the deer out, wells or some kind of water to be able to water the plants, fertilizer, manure, workforce. And, is there a role for government that could quickly step up production in a time where we can't get the food anymore? And now we're looking at, a government that's slapping tariffs and, the grain, China's buying it from Brazil rather than here. And so the farmers are left not knowing. You could talk about that but again, and even a sort of a movement, the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again, a lot of it is absolutely nuts and going to probably kill a lot of people who can't get vaccines or whatever. But at the same time, there is this push to do, local healthy food.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah. Maybe we know how to do that. Maybe we can figure out how to remember how to do that.
Well, and to your exact point, we are now 4 generations away from knowing a farmer. Mm-hmm. Not just being a farmer. That's 5, 6 generations back. We were a farmer, or we lived in a community that had our farmer that we, purchased our products from. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, you may not even know a farmer or even know that there are farms. And
kids who don't know where food comes from.
Well, that's the thing is that, you and I have talked about this, that agriculture is kind of a jargon word. But if you say food, agriculture is food, and it's fiber, and it's forestry, and it's all the things that we live in agricultural buildings, right? Because it's wood and other structures. We wear agricultural products because most of our clothing is still coming from some semblance of agriculture. I mean, yes, not polyester, but all the rest of it.
You're wearing a hemp jacket, I'm sure, right?
It is hemp. Yeah, I'm going to eat it after
amazing.
This. Yeah. It's going to be great.
Just don't smoke it.
Maybe. But how do we get back to teaching everybody where food comes from, getting them to experience the growing of a tomato? I tell this story all the time, but I still remember the day and the place and the person who showed me that blackberries grew. Like, I didn't know that food grew, and I walked up and she had this whole garden, and she said, go ahead and pick a blackberry, one of my favorite fruits that I knew came from the grocery store because that's where I got them. Mm-hmm. And there was this epiphany, and I was like 5 years old, and I didn't have 4-H, I didn't have FFA. There were none of these agriculture education programs near where I grew up in suburban Prince George's County. And so how do we not just the once a year throw kids in a bus and take them to a pumpkin patch, but how do we infuse agricultural education so that when these kids become policymakers, protecting the food supply, food policy is top of mind. In addition, you can also be an environmental advocate and a housing crusader and all these other things which are critically important, but none of that matters without food.
So we've touched on 2 things now that are important in Anne Arundel County where we're starting.
Yeah.
And we have the seeds to grow some great programs. One is ag education, and we've got a great program at Southern High School. But we have a superintendent who worked in Texas and knows what a really massive ag education program could look like, and he's very excited. And then we also have the Regional Ag Center. So let's talk about both of those things. How do we get from where we are to where we want to be on ag education, and are there models around the state that are worth looking at?
Well, there are some models around the state. First of all, we have no choice. We have to get there. There have been a couple of executive orders that the governor has signed which include environmental education and literacy and agriculture literacy as goalposts, things that we need to have. And each county comes at it from a different way. I'll use Caroline County as just a fun example because they're going after it through food. So they have a buyer in the local food system that is not only sourcing local products, but has set up an external kitchen, because most school kitchens are not real kitchens. They're for warming and prepping and all of that.
Yeah.
Has an external kitchen where they do the actual processing of the local ag into components that all of the schools can simply warm up. So they're freezing the broccoli as it comes in, not during the school year, and the lettuce that's coming in is packaged in a way, and carrots, et cetera, so that it can be used later.
And this is specifically for the schools?
Specifically for the schools.
Interesting.
But who's working in that production kitchen? It's the kids.
Oh, wow.
And then who's working in the school kitchen? It's the kids. So they're going at it from a culinary training standpoint, because if you say who's excited about ag, not many hands are going to go up. But who's excited about food? Every hand goes up. You want to help make lunch? Yeah. You want to help make the menu creative? Yeah. You want to go catch the catfish to put into the catfish cakes that we've gotten USDA to approve as a lunch menu item? Kids love it.
That sounds like fun.
So that's how one school system's going about it. But and we've toyed with the idea of pushing a course, a curriculum. But what if we embedded ag in everything?
As an activity, yeah.
Within math, within geography, right? I mean, if you just use agriculture and farming as an example, kids will be a little more accustomed to it. We're also hearing that there may be an AP course that's coming out that is specifically focused on the food system. And again, it was kind of pitched, do you want something on agriculture or food system? And all of us ag secretaries from across the country and commissioners and directors voted that we'd rather have something on the food system than on agriculture, because agriculture is kind of a jargon thing, and I don't know who's going to take it. But my kids, probably your kids, they like food. They might take an AP course on food. They might.
All right, folks. So expect in Anne Arundel County to see a movement led by students. I know some of them a lot of them from Southern High School who've been part of the FFA program.
It's a great program.
And then Don Pulliam, who's on the school board from the southern part of the county, is a huge advocate for it. And we have a superintendent that is just waiting for
game on.
Game on. So hopefully that'll get underway. But you mentioned when you were talking about the processing for the kitchens, of course, you knew where my mind was going.
Sounds familiar, right?
Yeah. So in Anne Arundel County, as you know, but for listeners, the Purdue grain elevator was going to shut down, and that was a concern to farmers who grew grain and took it there to sell it. We ended up acquiring it with the state money. The senator at the time, State Senator Elfreth, helped to put the group together, and Governor Moore got on board. And we got an operator, and it operated for a year. And people started to – that operator wasn't ideal. Some people weren't getting paid on time, and people started to get other ways to get their grain to market, or they stopped growing grain and they switched to something else. And so there was no operator that was willing to do it. So here we have this facility at the far south side of the end of the county, almost on the Calvert County line, off of Route 4.
Down where food grows.
Down where food grows, surrounded by farms all over southern Maryland, close to markets too, in Anne Arundel, Prince George's, even going into D.C. on Route 4. And so there was a plan for a regional ag center in St. Mary's County that fell through. The Southern Maryland Ag Development Corporation, which is a multi-county ag group, came to us and said, and we immediately went to them too and said, how about this site for that? So we're doing a feasibility study. Tell us what a regional ag center might look like, and what kind of questions we need to ask before we move forward.
Well, first of all, thank you for your vision in picking up that project. It's a great concept. There are a few other jurisdictions in other parts of the state that are realizing that as the industries move from commodity crops and big grain elevators to food production, that there needs to be a centralized facility like you would a grain elevator, with lots of farmers coming to a central area to drop off their products, to have it dried or to have it stored. You need a production facility. Otherwise, each farmer is going to be responsible for their own little production facility, which triggers zoning and permitting and health and environment.
Costs a lot of money, too.
It costs a lot of money, and there's very specialized equipment to clean and slice and bag carrots, for example. So what if you had that centralized facility to encourage lots of farmers to grow food? And then the centralized facility either co-op based or staffed. It could be fully staffed. Could be making things out of it, jams, jellies, preserving products. I mentioned freezing before. It could be fermenting products, right? Pickles. It could be all of these different things. And each of those takes a skill set, but specialized pieces of equipment. Commercial kitchen. I mentioned the carrot processor. Well, that's for carrots. You may be able to use that for something else, but for potatoes, you probably need a separate piece of equipment, an automated potato washer, scrubber, peeler, packer, chopper, onions. You get into all these food crops that can be marketed at the farmer's market, can be marketed other places as well. But when you think about the school system, the Caroline County example, that's because there was someone there with a vision to start a little production area. Not every place is going to have that. But if the farmers can be using this center to package their food that they're growing in a way that is marketable and promotable, then you could have an enormous impact, not only on the food system, but on the agricultural base in the county.
And we're not just talking about it all being government-run and subsidized necessarily. We can have an operator
someone
come
has
in.
to prompt it.
There's added value, which means that there's revenue that can be produced.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah.
But very often it's the government's place to seed something, to prompt something. And that's why you were spot on with the grain elevator. But I think Southern Maryland is a unique example. And if I could just touch on that for a minute.
Yep.
Southern Maryland used to be one of our huge commodity-producing regions in the state. Through zoning changes in a couple of counties, you had development creep further and further south from outside the D.C. suburbs, and now St. Mary's County is some parts of it considered D.C. suburbs. What happened over time is properties got chopped up. There was not the density of commodity crops anymore. And over time what you had is the seed suppliers went away, the tractor repair teams and,
it's hard to get
supplies
work
went
done.
away.
Yep.
And so the farmers in far southern Maryland are going to Bel Air or Frederick or down into Virginia pretty
Or
deep.
buying land in Iowa
Or
and moving out.
Or leaving if it's their complete dedication. I mean, some people cash out and sell their land for a development and live perfectly happy lives without guilt. And others cannot fathom giving up their land but can't seem to get it to pencil out without the scale. And so the grain elevator, it wasn't just your 1 year of owning it that kind of put it on pause. It was the industry's in transition. And we see more folks who used to grow tobacco, who used to grow large commodity crops, are growing food now, table crops, which they need a facility, but they need a different type of facility. So
And
that's where the wrap comes in.
And I'll note that some of that food is that people eat as meat.
It is?
And that processing.
A lot of it is.
Yeah. And I know that we went on some tours of some Anne Arundel County farms, but the waiting list to be able to get an animal processed, whether it is bison or whether it is cattle or whether it is sheep or whatever it is long. I mean, they were talking about having to get their spot a year in advance, and they still had to. I mean, there just aren't enough places to do it. So the St. Mary's facility was going to be to process animals and meat, and that's one of the things that we're looking at in our feasibility study.
Well, and that's critically important. And one of the reasons why that's important is that animal agriculture can be extremely profitable. Extremely profitable. And right now, more than ever, farmers are getting quite high margins off of meat, especially if someone can process it and then they can bring it back and sell it on the farm. If they're selling it wholesale or to schools or whatever, different model, still works really well.
And I will note that the pastures that feed those animals are, when they're well managed, which they are if they're good operations, really filter the nutrients that would otherwise go into the bay pretty darn well. So it's good for the Chesapeake.
They do, and we could go down that whole path and talk about what's good for the bay and not good for the bay. But rotational grazing, old-fashioned rotational grazing, is actually pretty good for the bay because you've got essentially a perennial crop in that grass. It's never tilled, it's never killed off, and if you're rotating the animals, that grass is growing roots. You've got native vegetation that's coming in there. You've got what may look to you and me as weeds but taste delicious to cattle or goats or whatever. So there's a real place for it. And you can do it on significantly fewer acres than you need for a corn operation.
And less infrastructure. You don't need a combine and all of that.
Correct. You do have to wrangle the bison, though.
Yeah,
I've heard. They don't always do what they're told.
Right. Okay, so that's an exciting project. The feasibility study will be getting underway here soon.
Great.
And hopefully we can come up with the financing to get it underway, cobbling together, state, federal, county, maybe private.
As is required, yeah.
Yeah. And I know I've actually talked to the governor about this directly, and his eyes lit up. And I know you've talked to him about it too. And so hopefully that'll happen. So some of the other challenges and things that farmers face that you face, what about just land conservation policy and how that works? I know some farmers sell development rights to keep it in the family. Is that – I know you don't do that directly, right?
Well, the Maryland Ag Land Preservation Foundation is within our department.
Oh, it is?
And then there are other preservation, conservation programs, MET, land trusts, et cetera. Counties have some of their own. But the gist is a farmer wants to keep farming or a landowner wants to keep that land open and undeveloped. They can sell the development rights. They're not selling the land. They're selling the right to develop it to the state. And the state is basically putting it in a drawer and saying, we're not going to develop it. We've paid you for these rights. It's been a hugely successful program. Our program alone has spent over $1 billion since the late 80s preserving land. And it's hundreds of thousands of acres across the state. And
it's a lot cheaper than actually buying the land and turning it into a park, though, right?
It is, because turning it into a park is developing it. I mean, you're having to put up trails and infrastructure and water and potties and all the other things that the public will love you for. But it is expensive.
And you don't have to pay the full value of the land, just the
development rights. Right. And so the landowner can still sell the land, but that land is in perpetuity in preservation. And one of the challenges with preservation is that we have as a state gotten locked in a certain period of time where we think agriculture means something. And I was part of the crew that made it okay in changing the policy to allow a winery on preserved property. But it's with certain specifications, and you have to use fruit that you're growing on the property, and all of that's great. But can you put a creamery on it? Can you have incidental camping? Right, all of these things have become challenges that the preservation boards have to take on. But it's a great program. Yeah.
And we've actually increased the numbers recently in Arundel. We kind of had it stalled for a while, and then we changed it. We put it into our Department of Planning where we had the right people running it and then hired the right person. And we've just increased the numbers of farms coming into the program. And I know that our residents, even if they don't live in rural areas, they want that. It's interesting when you go to the county council and it's a bill having to do with farming and agriculture, you tend to get the support. And I've experienced this before I was in politics. It's not that hard. I remember going to the county executive who wouldn't talk to us at the time, but we went around him to the council and we got exactly what we wanted. Didn't make him happy, but it was good policy. And that's happened a number of times, and it's continuing to happen. So what have we missed? Anything, any part of ag and food production that you want to make sure we cover before we wrap this up?
Well, if I could talk briefly about some of the challenges that I hear about daily from farmers.
Okay.
So you mentioned early on, and thank you for putting it in your plan, that profitability has to be part of the plan for agriculture. It can't just be preserve it for open space. We actually have to preserve the farm business as well. You used to say preserve the farmer, and someone said that sounded weird, but no, we're preserving the business.
Yes.
And it's critical because farms are under such significant pressure. You mentioned tariffs, the uncertainty right now of who we're going to buy, who we're going to sell to, and frankly, where we're going to buy our fertilizer from, because the prices can be varying so dramatically this week because of tariffs, and then the courts knock down the tariffs, and maybe next week things are different. And so there's this mad scramble. There's also this general uncertainty where USDA, we're big supporters of USDA, but the administration has cut some really critical programs that they sounded like they might have been subsidies, but really they were trying to alter the food system. one program paid schools to buy local products. Mm-hmm. So you're training the school systems to buy local products. You'll find over time the food's more nutritious. You're actually spending the money in your neighborhood, so the economy is lifting up, higher tax revenue, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other one was funding food banks to buy local products.
Yeah.
So you had all these farmers under these programs who were growing more food instead of feed, growing more food, and those programs just disappeared.
Yeah.
So there's that. There's pressures from the solar industry, who's looking for the cheapest, flattest land to put solar on to help meet the state's clean energy goals. Great goal, but it directly conflicts with how do we keep farmers farming. Mm-hmm. Most farmers, your listeners may or may not know, most farmers don't own the land they farm. Mm-hmm. They lease it from someone else.
Especially in this area.
Well, you mentioned the 20-acre plots. Yeah. They're cobbling together 18 plus 18 plus 18 of those acres minus the home site to farm in the middle. Mm-hmm. And if those folks get a better deal from solar, and by the way, it's a much better deal than a farmer can pay, they're going to go with solar. And so farmers begin to lose the land. We're really concerned about that on the Eastern Shore, where the land prices tend to be a little suppressed compared to the high-pressure areas like Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the big challenges. And so
our farmers are well aware of all these.
Which is why I always lead with help me help you make farming more profitable. So what are the ideas? Yeah. Like, let's get past the complaining about the commodity markets and prices of corn haven't been up in 10 years and dairy prices are down. I'll pay as much as I can for good ice cream. Mm-hmm. So take your dairy and let's build a creamery.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I'll spend a lot of money on a bottle of whiskey. So take that corn or wheat or rye and let's distill it.
Yeah.
So,
well, we are damn lucky to have you in the job that you're in, because the kind of creative thinking outside the box, just like you were talking to the farm family about options, I'm sure you're talking to everybody in government, the other agencies, and working with them. I know you work really closely with MDE, Environment, and Community Development even.
And DNR daily.
DNR, yep. And it's really important for that coordination to happen. So, thank you. And I think all of the future generations should be thanking you and the department for the work that you do. I actually think that kids do love, they're interested in food, but man, I know some
kids. They
love
to get in the dirt.
Yeah, the dirt under the fingernails and get out there and do some stuff like that. And we build the next generation of farmers. So thank you for everything you do.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. And thank you for what you're doing and your leadership with the concept behind the RAC and ag education. I mean, this is this will be a new model for the state.
Yeah. Well, hopefully whoever takes my place will be as passionate about it as I am, and we'll get it done.
They better be.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. You're listening to the Pittman and Friends podcast. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button, share with a friend, and join us for the next episode.